Good morning and welcome to the Corporate Administrative Services Committee meeting of the Sunshine Coast Regional District. Today is Thursday, March 24th, and it is just past 9:30. I'd like to acknowledge that we're within the territory of the Sechelt First Nation, and we operate in the territory of the Sechelt and the Squamish First Nations. So we have an agenda in front of us. Our CAO had to step out for a moment, and he is the one who's going to be presenting item number 2. So what I'd like to suggest is that we start with 3 and we can put 2 back in when he comes back to the meeting. All right, so I don't know if we necessarily need to formally amend it. Would you like us to amend it? We'll just do order. Okay, so I'd look for an adoption of the agenda as presented. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. So moving on to item number 3, Sunshine Coast. So first let's receive all the reports. How's that? Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. And move on to item number 3, and that's over to our Deputy Corporate Officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll present on behalf of the Deputy Corporate Officer today. The bylaw rewrite coming forward is a result of significant amendments to BC's Freedom of Information and privacy laws that came into effect at the end of November in 2021. And it's also timely with respect to the creation of a new Information and Privacy Coordinator role at the SCRD. The proposed bylaw brings us into alignment with the changes in the Act and also provides some needed administrative updates to reflect our current day practices. I'm happy to answer any questions the directors may have.
Directors, any questions? Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. Congratulations on making the bylaw so much shorter for this. So that was something I did know. I did have a couple of questions. In the provincial press releases, there was an option for local governments to include a non-refundable $10 application fee for all non-personal FOI requests. I believe the provincial government has that as a mandatory $10. So it's just how did staff consider that in the bylaw drafting? Thanks.
Thank you for the question through the chair. So we are implementing the application fee here at the SCRD, and it is part of the Act. It's a new section 75(1) subsection A. So it's not included in the fee schedule, but we do make reference to it in the bylaw under section 5A, a prescribed application fee.
Follow-up or?
Yeah, other municipalities have been, as I was reading, we're looking at it as an obstacle, a barrier to participation in FOI, and the cost recovery and the administrative expense to administer the fee. So is it in staff's point of view that this is going to reduce FOIs, cost recovery? What is the intent behind the non-refundable? What problem we are trying to solve, I guess, by having that application fee there?
I think that from our perspective, we don't actually see it as reducing the number of FOIs that we receive because the fee is minimal. And in that sense, we looked at it more in terms of helping to offset the actual costs of the FOI processing, which $10 doesn't seem to go a long way with that regard. However, we do recognize that with regular applicants, the fees that we can charge, they're already highly subsidized by the taxpayer. So our decision was to implement it. It's not mandatory for local governments. And at some point, if we find that administratively it is not working for us, or if we encounter situations where it may be a perceived barrier, we can always relook at that decision.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Yes, I also wanted to say what a elegantly simple bylaw by comparison. The old one looks like it was excavated from the Valley of the Kings. The top of page 4, there is reference to the province implementing mandatory privacy management programs. Can you tell me what that means?
So that provision has yet to come into effect, but it will come into effect later this year. Basically, we have to come up with a framework in terms of our collection and storage and disclosure of personal information. It could include things like establishing personal information banks, privacy banks. But it's done, I think it's being done in tandem with the requirements for the privacy breach notification as well. So we'll be developing a framework by which certain types of privacy breaches must be reported to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. So we do have a process for that, but I think the Act is looking for us to have something more formal implemented, and we'll look to see if there's any further requirements that are being imposed beyond what we're already doing here at the Regional District.
Something else that's come out, I think the government has indicated that it's no longer required to store material in Canada. Material can be stored out of the country, but there have to be processes in place for how you determine whether or not it's actually meeting our requirements or not. So there's lots of stuff coming down. So, yes, your department will be busy. Any other questions on this one? Director Hiltz.
I got two, but the first one is the purpose of defining a commercial applicant in the bylaw. What is it trying to achieve?
Thank you for the question. So within the legislation, they distinguish between a commercial applicant and an individual applicant, and that is really with respect to the fees, the allowable fees that we may charge. So with a commercial applicant, we can actually abandon the regulation, the fee schedule, and charge the actual costs to the regional district for a commercial applicant.
We've got buzzing and dinging and everything. Go ahead with your second question.
Thanks. The last question is in section 4.1 on page 15. It was about the coordinator can take all the head can delegate all responsibilities to the coordinator. So is that in writing? Is it in verbal, or is it like, I'm just wondering about the process of, like, sounds like the head doesn't need to be there almost. So thanks.
Thank you for the question. So there are certain duties that are under the Act specified for the head. And similarly, the delegation, the authority for the delegation is the bylaw. That is the authority for the head to delegate certain duties. So for example, the head would delegate to the Information and Privacy Coordinator the authority to actually prepare a disclosure package for release. But the head still has a responsibility to review those packages before they are released and sign off on disclosure.
So in the bylaw, I didn't catch that. It specifies which duties are delegated. I just saw it may delegate, so there wasn't like a list of things that it was delegated to the coordinator.
The duties are prescribed in the legislation.
Oh, okay. So it doesn't have to be in writing then about you're going to do this and I'm going to do this.
Correct. It's up to the head to decide which duties will be delegated per what is written in the legislation.
Okay, sure.
So in other words, there are certain things you have to do. You cannot delegate, but all the others you could delegate if you chose. And that's laid out in the legislation.
Correct.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on the commercial applicants. Do we get many commercial applicants?
I'm not sure how to define many, but we do get commercial applicants, absolutely.
Any further questions or comments? Director Lee?
Thank you, Chair. I just was looking for clarification on the non-personal exemption for the $10 fee. Anyways.
Thank you for the question. So if somebody is submitting an FOI request for their personal information, we would not charge the $10 application fee.
So it would, say it was me putting one in and I said I wanted everything where you mentioned my name, you wouldn't charge me the $10?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, there is a recommendation on page 3 What would you like to do? Director McMahon?
I'd be happy to move the recommendation on page 3.
Is there a seconder for the recommendation? Seconded. Any further questions or comments before we call the question? All those in favor? Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 4, Annex C, pages 16 through 28. This is the 2022 budget debrief and 2023-2027 financial planning process. And over to our Chief Financial Officer and Corporate Services. Oh, sorry, no, General Manager, Corporate Services, Chief Financial Officer. That's all your title. Should we add more? Over to you,
Thank you.
Ms. Burrows.
Thank you, Chair. So this particular report is been a customary report presented after the budget process has concluded to identify process improvements and identify how we'd like to proceed with the timelines going into the next financial planning cycle. So throughout the process, several items were identified and staff have also highlighted some areas for consideration. And so most notably, there are some items here for decision, but it doesn't preclude if there's any additional items that the committee wants to identify. So it's not an exhaustive list. So in particular, staff are recommending that we work towards developing an actual board budget policy. Many local governments have this, which identify what our policies and procedures are related to the financial planning policy. Right now, we do have an internal manual that provides some of this outline, but it doesn't provide that to a public-facing document. We've also identified that there are some education and learning opportunities, and I do apologize, this was duplicated in the staff report. We also have some budget reference documents that were identified. So in particular, we had a new spreadsheet developed for the committee to work through as part of the budget process, which understands the implication of each budget process. So that's been identified and provided in attachment B. We've also identified that in the budget proposal, there may be some opportunities for clarification, and in particular to climate action impacts and future financial implications. We've also identified that one of the items that happens outside of the financial planning process but has financial implications, we're identifying that should be part of the pre-budgeting process, and that's for the asset management and capital planning processes. We're making financial policy decisions outside of the budget, and sometimes those are not always well understood as far as what the impacts are going to be financially for those particular services. So in particular this year, we did the protective services and the fire department's capital planning, and making those financial decisions outside of the budget process created a little bit of disconnect between the financial implication and for the budget. We also have provided a preliminary timeline for the 2023-2027 financial planning process, understanding that this year we're in an election cycle. And therefore, we are recommending that we go back to the historical timelines where we adopt the financial plan at the end of March. We are working towards approving or moving our, at least our draft financial plan as early in the fiscal as possible to allow for projects to begin. But we just felt that based with this particular election cycle, board orientation, and familiarizing the new board with the SCRD, that this would allow for a little bit more time for those processes to happen. We've also outlined some of the communication and engagement, and our manager of communications has provided this outline here. And so it's outlining what we did this year and what we propose to do in the coming years. And also just as far as what some of the next steps are. So if there's any other further discussion, we're happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Thank you. I've just been reminded, before we go to discussion about that, I've just been reminded that we do not have a vice chair. So we need to appoint a vice chair. I'd like to appoint Director Ties as vice chair. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Perfect.
Thanks.
Voluntold.
Yes. All right, so back to the business at hand. Questions, comments, input, Annex C. Director Hiltz is madly going through it. Go ahead.
I'll take my first one. The policy versus the operational procedures, so the operational procedures will be what you start with, and will you end up with one policy, or will you still have an operational procedure and a front-facing policy? Or are they going to be blended, I guess is the question.
Thank you for the question. So the board policy, or what's envisioned, is that we would have a board policy that would outline things like when the board will allow for financial plan amendments. So one of the items was identified is that we have a pretty high level of financial plan amendments throughout the year. I think we had over 30 in the last budget cycle, which is quite unusual. We would typically see those as emerging items. So if we are successful with a grant, so those types of things would be outlined in the policy. That would also be able to guide staff what's within the box, the framework. So that's a board decision because you guys manage the financial plan bylaw. Things procedurally would be internal, such as business cases will be developed and what specific items would be required in a business case. Those might show up in a budget proposal, but internally we may need to understand what support service requirements would be needed, what timelines, and then the board decisions are things like financial and resourcing policies. So they are quite separate. They're not integrated. Right now, we have a document that blends the two, but it's not public facing. And we've identified that it's difficult for, I think, public, community members, maybe even board somewhat, and the staff to navigate. And so what we're really trying to do is be really clear and succinct with policy versus procedure.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Sure. Okay, first, the timelines look great. They make perfect sense to me. So the capital asset planning is outside of the budget process, and so, as far as I can tell, are decisions around service levels. Those are not part of the budget process. So the default is that we will continue to offer the same level of service unless, the question is asked, are we going to change that? So how do service level decisions fit into the budget process?
That's an interesting question, depending on which service you may be identifying. The one that comes to mind would be transit, where you are creating a master plan, which is essentially your service plan. Because we do not have consistent service plans, however, the regional district is trying to work towards that, which outlines, how many hours of service we provide for transit. So we actually have that, which then translate to a financial consequence. Now, we don't have that necessarily for all of our services in the regional district. And so I think we're working towards that. The asset management plans are one component, and the capital plans are one component of that. In the case of the wastewater, those actually probably were service plans, but were named asset management plans, because it outlined what level of services, so the preventative maintenance schedules, how many times you're going to do inspections, the staffing levels. So that's a service level decision. So again, those particular discussions are happening outside of the budget, but what we want to do is, every year we review these plans, and we want to make that part of the budgeting process, because it likely means resourcing, so staffing implications, and or financial decisions about what level of maintenance you're going to provide financially to upkeep the infrastructure. Now, not all of our services, so building inspection is not in that framework. So I think that's something for us to contemplate going forward as to how service level or services of the regional district that are service by nature, how we decide what level of service we'll provide. So building inspection, planning and development, maybe another area. I think we need to think a little bit more on how we decide that, because it is very tied to the financial plan, but we don't have a mechanism to decide those types of things. They're implied levels of service.
Yeah, follow up. So, I mean, an obvious one there is recreation and parks. With transit, we also are on a regular sort of review cycle because of our contract with BC Transit. So presumably, when we get our service levels determined, then we would also set up a review cycle that I think annually might be a bit challenging, but it depends. In some cases, because you would want to commit to more than a year just for sanity and planning. But I look forward to this. Thank you.
So I notice on page 20 that there are two options for that new asset management and capital funding plans, funding policy decisions. I understand where we're going with this. You're looking at bringing this information to the board and to the community based on the conversations that we've had so that we can look at implications for taxing, right, prior to actually seeing it at round one. So if you're looking at the two options, you've got one at November 28th, 29th, and the other December 5th and 6th. Do you anticipate that there would be community engagement following these sessions, potentially, or not? Because I think that may have a bearing on the dates you actually look at.
I think it depends if we're in a review cycle. So in the case of recreation, if it's something like an inflationary increase, in the instance where it's a full new plan, so if we're going to be starting to present the water utilities asset management and capital plans, those I believe would have to be very much integrated into the current water dialogues that are out there to introduce the public to some of the concepts in advance to providing it to the board for decision. So I think that's what we still have to navigate as far as staff, as far as what the process is. And some things may have larger impacts to the community than others. And in the case of water, where we're also undertaking rate reviews from a public consultation perspective, we're talking about, it's managing how that messaging integrates and doesn't confuse the public. So I think that's something we'd have to work with our communications and engagement and our technical staff as far as ensuring we message this stuff properly, because sometimes in our experience with the wastewaters, especially we have 15, they're not all uniform. I think we had a lot of very good learning experiences through that. And so I think we'll take those away into what we do going forward. But I think the short answer is yes, there has to be some communication engagement.
So you've got two options on here. Are you wanting us to determine one, or are you going to have them both kind of bookmarked, and then depending on what we're going to be looking at reviewing in that time frame, we would determine which one of those dates we'd look at?
Well, I think this is for pre-budget in general. What we're saying is all of pre-budget, we're going to be looking at the carry forwards. It's not just reviewing the asset management plans at that particular time. What we're estimating is maybe 2 days. We may need 3. It really depends on how we do it. But I think it's really, do we believe, just knowing what your experience is do you believe the new board would be prepared at the end of November, or would you like to give them another week into the early December? I think that's it.
We're all laughing here because they're not going to be ready whichever date we pick, I think.
Yeah, right. And so I think that's part of it is contemplating the timelines to review all that, understanding that we're also going to be taking on this new piece, which is reviewing these asset plans. So what I'm hearing from you is give them enough time. So maybe the December is the preferable option.
All right, Director McMahon.
Yeah, I'd say it took me about 3 years to get prepared for this. So where was I going? You mentioned inflationary costs, and it looks like we are facing some unprecedented inflationary costs, and I'm just wondering if this will have any impact on the budget process or on the number of budget amendments we end up doing. Just
I think so. I see two parts to that question. One is, how do we see inflation impacting the future financial plan? And I don't have a crystal ball. We really don't know what the world impacts. It's really very uncertain at this time. Economists believe that we're in this for a while. So will that have a financial implication to how we consider our budgets going forward? Absolutely. How we manage that, we will likely have to have discussions, likely with this board into the next board. As far as the policy goes and how we contemplate, that could be one of the policy statements where there is considerations for changing economic conditions. That may be a consideration where financial plan amendments would be very much considered. There may be some other tactics strategically that the board may want to contemplate. Are these things critical? Do we want to postpone them until we have a little more stable economic outlook? There's a lot to contemplate right now. The world is very different than it. It's very strange that we're saying that after a pandemic, but I think that's where we are financially for sure.
Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. And following up on the option 1 or 2 and the recommendation. So as it stands, the amendment includes both options. Or are you actually asking us to select one at this point? Or are we just saying put both in? Like that was just some housekeeping there.
Preferably clear direction is preferred. So I would say, per option 2. Therefore the recommendation would be clear that we're going to be doing pre-budget in that December 5th, 6th timeframe.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Yeah, I just wanted to go on. By the way, I'm good for option 2 as well, but the budget survey got a lot of unique responses. The thing about the engagements on our website is that the number of views is not unique people, it's the number of unique views, which may have been some of us going back and checking all that information again. So I thought the survey was very successful, and I would like to see us do some more surveys. Maybe, one focused on particular areas of our budget, for instance. We could brainstorm for some questions or collect some questions that the public has asked to figure out which areas people are really interested in. But I thought that was a good tool, and I would like to see it again.
Thank you. Director Pratt.
Thanks, Chair. The CFO had mentioned potentially 3 days for for the new asset management and capital funding plans piece. Do you want to just put the 3 days in now, just so it's at least a calendar holder? Especially with understanding the overwhelm that newly elected directors do feel. At least it allows you the flexibility, if it's already in the calendar, to just plan for 3 days now.
Well, so here's what I see. We no longer have our community partners and stakeholders coming during pre-budget. So last time we didn't take the whole day, I think, for the pre-budget. So I was thinking it's a whole separate other day just for the capital asset planning. That was sort of it. We could put 3 days and always cancel one. I mean, that's always a good feeling.
Well, and being that, just as a follow-up, being with a new board, it might be best to have the community partners in, at least for the first cycle, the first budget cycle for them.
And the other piece, when you're talking about, the asset management piece, there may be some more information that's going to have to be presented around asset management if they don't know what asset management is. So, we have a base level of knowledge now going into these conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit. So
Reasonable.
Yeah, but the new people coming in won't necessarily have that base. So I mean, I agree with you. If we book 3 days, we can
Yeah.
always scale it back to 2 if that's
Yeah.
what it looks like, but at least.
It's always happy to have a free day, I'll
Yes.
say. But
Yes.
but if scrambling to get everything fit in 2 days it can be really painful. So
So if we were going to add another day, what day would that be in December? Is this Thursday, Friday right now? I didn't look what these days were, the actual days.
Currently they're on Monday, Tuesday, so we would just add the Wednesday.
So 5, 6, 7? Yeah, no, yeah, right. Director McMahon?
Sorry, I'm off back on page 18, the climate action impacts. I'm really happy to see that there. And I'm wondering, does this have a tie-in with our strategic plan that we might build in some more concrete climate goals, and then that would also fit into the budget process and so forth? That was probably a CAO question, but I throw it out there for general consideration.
Tina, did you want to answer that, or should we take that up with the CAO later?
Yeah, I think with CAO, I think there are some pretty key bullet points there as to what staff envision there. We do have several of the different processes going on this year that will inform this particular section of the budget proposals. So that work as it evolves will definitely help guide and inform. If there's more strategic and specific goals as far as targets go, then again, that would have to be integrated and contemplated in that. But that definitely, as that evolves, the budget proposal would evolve.
Thank you. Director Lee?
Thank you. I just wanted to say I was very happy to see the future financial implications come into the reports. I believe that's a great improvement, so thank you.
Director Hilt?
Thanks, Chair. We're talking about general debriefing is on the table, so I'm looking at page 21. It says the biggest issue, however, is getting the community involved. And one of the things that my observation is the reason the community doesn't get involved because they don't know what decisions they can actually make. People, if they come to these meetings, think that they're going to up this cost center by $100,000 and take that one down. I think that's one of the frustrations is people don't know why they're going to be there. To be informed about and then we're going on to the information side of things, and people don't necessarily have a good history with numbers, and so that's where I end up at the spreadsheet on page appendix attachment B. And I was going through some of the numbers, And, I'm not sure if this is intentional or not, but the dollar values include the cents. So in my ideas, you get rid of unnecessary zeros. If you got a bunch of extra zeros, don't put them in. If you're not talking dollars and cents and you're rounding off to dollars, just do the dollars. Don't put in. So it just, making it easier to read, and percentages when you're going to a thousandth of a percent, I think is pretty difficult to accommodate. So rounding it off to like a tenth of a percent is probably close enough for what the public, so just the presentation of how the numbers are presented, having dollar signs and the commas, I think these things can make small differences of how the public is willing to engage in the numbers on the pieces of paper. So that's one of just something I'm noticing, because I think we are interested in the details, and the public is maybe at a step back from that level of detail that we want. A thousandth of a percent seems a little bit much, right? So, and it is a draft as well, so I'm not sure what the intent, but that's one of the things I see is the presentation of the numbers and what decisions people can make going into these sessions. That's the observations. Thanks.
That's a really good point. I've never thought of it from that perspective. So we say we want your input into the budget, but we don't say what we want your input on in the budget. Like you're not going to impact, the day-to-day maintenance work that's happening. None of that's going to be changed. So what do we allow them to have input into or not? And how do, yeah, okay.
And the follow-up, I feel like a disembodied voice here. The difference between municipalities and regional districts. I was at the Town of Gibson's budget presentation, and the documents that they presented, they're listing individual pieces of equipment, and people are going, well, how much is that piece of equipment? Whereas the regional district going, we're looking at a fleet service. And so the difference of how at the municipal level, they say, I don't want that sidewalk paved this year. And we don't have that discussion at the regional district. So I think even the differences between municipalities and regional districts needs to be accommodated, because I don't think, should I even care if I live in Gibson's or Area F from a service delivery and my quality of life? I don't think so. I think people could care less where they live sometimes. They just want the services that make their lifestyle helpful. So I think that's something that the whole package of what local governments put in to the economy to provide the services is kind of in silos. The District of Sechelt, the Town of Gibson's, the SERD, we're all in silos. And so nothing actually puts together what local government puts in to make this community work. So I think that's kind of one of the things I don't see is no one puts it all together for us. So that's a follow-up, is the differences between how if I go to the Town of Gibson's meeting is going to be different than the regional district meeting is going to be different than the District of Sechelt meeting. And so that was one thing. Thanks.
Yeah, an example for that, in Sechelt, we invite the community associations to bring forward what they'd like to see happen. West Sechelt Community Association, for example, for many years, I mean, ever since I've been on council, has come forward and said, we want the area in front of West Sechelt Elementary School cleaned up and, sidewalks, and, I mean, we're concerned about the safety of the kids. So even though it hadn't appeared in our 5-year plan, it had been brought to staff's attention. So we actually recently included in a grant, and so that's going to be happening, and they're ecstatic because it's finally something they've been bringing forward that's showing up. So I think what you're saying is how do we engage the community in a way that they actually can come in and have some input into the budget, rather than just, here's our budget, tell us what you think, and they no idea what to tell us. Yeah, Director Ties. Sorry, Tina, did you want to go first? Sorry, I didn't see you.
Yeah, it's just responding, Chair, to some of those comments, and I think this is what is being contemplated as part of the communication and engagement as far as how we engage, how the surveys are structured. So the last survey was really just dipping our toe into how are people wanting their information, what's important to them. So I think expanding on that, but I think what we've noticed here at the regional district is because our services are so vast, and they touch local service areas, but they also touch regional areas. So it is quite different. And because of our funding structure, sometimes it can be difficult to try to get a universal message out. So definitely something we are bantering about in the background as far as I've been here and as far as I know with all regional districts, because you've got that real micro focus and then you've got the macro focus. So definitely something we are looking at as far as how we engage people on those specific items that are important to them and what financial implication it has. As far as some of the how the information is presented, definitely we are constrained in a regional district in such that municipalities tend to present their operational and their capital budgets. And what's difficult for us is we can do that, but it doesn't then translate what the financial implication will be to each service area. So that is part of the challenge. So for sure, what we are trying to do too is get a broader reach to our community associations, and that was started through our communications and engagement manager. So that work is starting to outreach as far as what's important to them. And so I think a lot of divisional managers and budget managers, so whether it's parks or infrastructure or whatnot, we do have that, but how we collectively provide that as far as the budget impact. So when we say budget engagement, what's difficult for community members is, what does that mean to me? Does it mean you're going to listen to me about the parks and fields that I want, about the service levels that we want? So I think that's what we're trying to navigate is what is the most effective way to engage the public on the budget?
Thank you. Director Ties.
Yeah, thanks. Just my comments on that is that generally our budget increases tend to be a sort of a death by 1,000 paper cuts kind of thing where, you know, you can't point a finger at just one thing, and they're highly complex. I think staff does a wonderful job putting together the financial plan, and that's where I send people to if they have questions. The 2022 to 2026 financial plan is a really great document. I think without simplifying it in some other way through the provincial, to the Local Government Act, I don't really see it becoming much easier to digest for the public. But I think, as Director McMahon has pointed out before, we have multiple ways of consulting with the public for adding services, but we really have no way of figuring out when enough is enough or too much is too much, and subtracting services, because you'll always find somebody yelling that they want more services, but you'll never hear anybody saying, okay, well, maybe we should get rid of this. And I think that's sort of where the crux of the problem is that we keep adding, but we never subtract.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Well, since I said something like that, it must be true. I was just thinking that the budget process is almost too late in the process. By the time we get to the budget, staff have already invested a lot of time and energy, and it's not very flexible. Huge chunks of our budget are pretty much mandatory in order to keep services going. So I think probably the better time to engage the public would be when we're reviewing service levels, I can't talk, or when we're looking at capital planning around things, whatever they are, the big things. And I'm thinking of just one example is that the Solar Association is very keen on seeing if the SCRD can put solar panels on top of the landfill after it's closed. So they need some help to figure out where to get into the process because that would be a budget proposal somewhere along the road. But before it becomes a budget proposal, it needs to be probably a feasibility study or something like that. And so groups that have particular interests need to figure out where to get on board. And it's not at budget time. It's way before that. In some cases, it may be several years before that. So that's where I would like us to focus our engagement. Because really, by the time we've gotten to budget, for the most part, except maybe for funding for community partners or something, a lot of the decisions are pretty much in the bag. And I finally wanted to say that I would love to know where the budget engagement is around MOTI, because that's, of course, what we hear about all the time, is go out and fix our roads. But, you know, as far as I know, the province never engages us about what we think MOTI's budget ought to be on the Sunshine Coast, and I would turn up for that meeting.
Director Kroll.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to what Director Hiltz was saying, it's really, you know, it's difficult from a municipal point of view because the accounting systems and the budgeting lines and the budget items are all different from the way the municipalities deal with it. So it's difficult from a municipal point of view to get that engagement from the community involved in the regional district planning. So I don't know if there is a way, like, you know, I appreciate that the CFO comes to council and does a budget presentation to the town, and you know there is a huge impact to our taxation through the regional district. I don't know if there is a way to make sort of things more apples to apples that people can understand a little better, and which hopefully would elicit a little more engagement. Now, having said more engagement, it usually means more questions, and it might have, you know, exacerbate, you know, with all the moving parts in a budget trying to deal with it. But I do appreciate the fact that finance does, you know, try and give us a spreadsheet with these decisions. This is how it's going to impact on the municipality. But as a process, I think the community really does feel somewhat left out, and it's left to the elected sitting on the board to make the awkward decisions and then have to answer to the community for the decisions that are made. So just a process where apples to apples could be a little more, so people understood what the process that's going on behind the curtain. If that made sense, I hope so.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. The difference between the municipalities, and there is a timing difference. The RD got to get in there first. The muni's got another 2 months, and so it seems like the engagement at the municipal is more about the service levels, like you're talking about, we want a sidewalk. And regional district, as Director McMahon is saying, it needs to be more operational. The service levels need to go into the operations, which go into the budget proposals, the pipelines are, the inputs into the pipe are at different times. And so just learning about that for me is interesting. But another comment I have is one of my most favorite documents at the regional district is that financial plan. It is just, that budget book is like, it is the Wikipedia of the regional district for me. And so anything that can be put into that document to enhance that, and an example would be function 640 is the Gibson District Public Library, which doesn't even mention 646, which is the Roberts Creek Public Library System. And so that the whole service is represented by two silos, but the silos don't talk together in this document that we look at. So if, an example, if 640 said money also comes from function 646, it starts to kind of create a better scope of what the whole service is. So, and I haven't gone through to see all the other interconnections because we have these participants. Municipalities, everyone's a participant. At the regional district, you're a participant here, you're a participant there, you don't participate. So I think this budget book is a way to kind of show how all these pieces come together. But it is fantastic. It's like, I couldn't live without that thing. It is great. So any way to enhance the information, and I call them scope notes, which is the detail under that to really enhance. There's a lot of white space in that book. And this is the frequently asked questions, is where does the library service get its money from? And so for me, put it in there, then we don't have to reinvent it every time the term comes around and we shift all the positions at the table. So more stuff in that book, because it stands from year to year. It's the best, it's one of the greatest things I know about in the regional district as a document. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Lee?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just flipping between a couple screens here. Attachment B, the new proposed spreadsheet, I have to say I do really like that format. It puts everything in one place. So I don't know if that's what you were looking at, that we agree it's a good thing, but I agree it's a good thing and I will use it. The other thing that I find a little difficult is that there's no last updated date on a lot of things. And I don't know if we could add that, because I'm never quite sure if I'm looking at the right one. So that's something, if it's possible, that we should consider, I believe. Anyways, thank you.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
And from a simple, concrete suggestion, I'm just going to make a general big can of worms observation. We have some services are like $10 million services, and then we have services that get a whole page in the budget book that are $200 services. And it seems like this is a very inefficient structure, that we must spend, with some of these little teeny tiny services, we must spend 3 times that much money just managing the service. So have we ever looked at rationalizing some of these services, like rolling them all into one bylaw instead of having 10 little teeny tiny things that clutter up our financial statements? I just thought I'd ask.
Who wants to weigh in on that one? I guess one of the questions, is it possible? First, like, given how they're set up.
I think this is more of a question for the corporate officer, but I'm going to just jump in and say, not likely, because those particular services have been established for a particular purpose. So dissolving a service, etc. If you recall the report we provided for wastewater and how complicated that is essentially the answer. So I guess the short answer is no, because that is the caution in establishing new services in a regional district, right? It's that they are, by design in a regional district, it's very specific. You have to identify the participants, how the cost recovery is going to happen, and it's very prescribed. So it's not like a municipality where you decide to do something and then you don't decide to do it and it just goes away.
Yeah, my follow-up here is that obviously the legislation never visualized what would happen after one of the regional districts I was talking to has 150 services. And nobody ever thought about how do we ever take this thing apart again when it gets too overburdened and cumbersome. So that perhaps is something that we should be raising with the province, because it really is an extremely cumbersome model.
All right, any further questions or comments? Director Hiltz.
Great conversation, by the way. Best, I think, on the budget debrief in the term, I would say, for me. I feel
Now that
more,
we're coming down to the wire.
It was on page 19. It's about the draft financial plan. So if you could just say something about, because we do get we get versions of the financial plan. So would there be something that becomes a formalized draft? I'm not sure how the version's different from a draft of how we do it right now. Thanks.
So I think what this is referring to is that part of what's been recommended, and we haven't quite gotten there, partly due to the pandemic, was that we could work towards developing a draft financial plan and adopting that by the year end. And so then we would just have to formalize the bylaw. So essentially, through each round of the budget process, you are provided what the draft financial plan is going to look like. Not necessarily in the schedule format that you're provided during the bylaw adoption, but essentially when we provide you those what if scenarios, that kind of is your draft financial plan. You've approved the different projects, you have indirectly approved the implied service levels, and essentially you're just building onto that when you adopt those financial plan, those new budget proposals. And then at sort of the final round of the budget and coming into the financial plan adoption, you're provided with what the financial implications going to be. And then the schedules accompany that. And of course, we have different things feeding into that, like what the assessments are going to do to that. So that's sort of the drafts that you're provided. And what's now accompanying that over the last couple of years is the financial plan book that you've because that provides all the intricacies and the details of really what you've approved. So I think that's what's meant as the draft, because it's not final until the final bylaw is adopted.
Director Pratt?
Thanks. So there's, in speaking about like the engagement process, getting the community engaged and the whole process piece, we, staff is really good at explaining it to the board and laying it all out for us like this. But when we're presenting it to the community, it tends to be already mixed in with the budget process. Like, this is the process and the numbers are already attached. And I'm wondering about maybe separating out those two and just talking about this is the process and just that piece for the community. And this is when you have input. This is when these things are going to be coming forward. And I'm finding that, you know, between Director McMahon's course, the subdivision thing last night, like, we have a lot of community engagement right now, a lot of community thirst and hunger for the information to find out how things are happening or the why of things. And maybe detaching them and just talking about the process at a different time that we're actually making the decisions. And saying, okay, look, this is when you're going to be able to have direct input, or this is who you talk to if you want to have direct input, versus actually having them intertwined in the two and doing the combined together. And then it could either be, you know, almost like one of the, I don't know if we have one of those already, or maybe it's an old one, but with the adoption or with the writing of a new policy, and you know, doing the whiteboard or something like that, or even, you know, putting a director on the hot seat to be the one to explain it, because we know Director McMahon's great at it and very not opinionated at all. But, you know, making it more personable, making it so it's tangible and it makes sense and it's at I'm going to say at a layperson's level. So it's easy to understand. This is what the process is. This is what some of the challenges are. This is why it's very siloed, and this is why we don't move around, but keeping the money piece completely out.
So you're almost saying May or June of the year, when regional district is starting budgeting, we actually go to the community and say, okay, we're starting our process. And this is what it looks like.
Yeah.
You know, staff are doing this and
So almost like the same presentation that staff is doing to here, but making it very personable and making it live and being able to answer the questions and everything on it. So it's demystifying the process for the community. So they're just like, well, the decisions have been made, so, you know, it doesn't matter. But it's just like, no, this is the process. These are the dates you wait for.
you could also go in that, what decisions actually come to the board?
Yeah.
Right? So, you know, if the province says this is mandatory, yes, it comes to us, but we basically have to rubber stamp it because we don't have any choice. It's required. So even having those kinds of pieces in there so that they actually see what are we actually making decisions on. And it's more policy and long-term kinds of direction sorts of things, and then staff look at how to make those happen. And that's where we need some input. Yeah. Director Lee and then Hilt. Oh, Tina, did you want to respond to that first?
Well, if I could just add, Chair, thank you. So one of the items that's not outlined in this report, but it did provide in the past, is sort of the wheel of steps that we take. And so one of the things that we could integrate as part of the policy is codify some of these steps. And so, of course, the strategic plan is the first guiding document. But I think what you're talking about is how do we integrate the corporate, the service planning, and sort of the annual priorities? And internally, that already happens, but it may not be completely apparent as far as, or really understood from the public's perspective is, if we're having an engagement session that's maybe making some service level decisions in June or August, that's going to potentially have a service implication to you. So it's not overt to the public. And so I think that's what's really intense, the intention of providing that policy document. So the board understands it and the public understands it, and it's integrated as part of our process. So right now what we're saying is, part of our budget is, the strategic plan, it kind of kicks off our plan, but there's a whole bunch of in-betweens that also encapsulates the process that leads to a budget decision eventually. So the financial piece. So I think those are the two separate parts that perhaps Director Pratt is mentioning. But I think that's what's envisioned as part of the plan, and making sure that it's very understood to the public is that, this is why you should come to or be part of these engagement sessions, because they may lead to a decision as far as a service level decision, a resourcing decision that will impact you, and it may impact you financially, but it also may impact you in a positive or negative way. In the sense of reducing services or enhancing services. So I think that's what we have to provide publicly, is what are the various steps and when is it that staff or the public need to be engaged.
All right, Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I really like this discussion we're having. I think public presentations are really the way to go, and I do note that there's 4 planned, which is good. And we got to find a way of getting the public's attention. And I've been trying to explain our budget service by service, and I find that I start with the reason for the investment, then all the funding sources, because people, including me, don't really understand all the funding sources when you end up with government transfers and grants and all those kind of things, carryovers, developers, fees. And I find it quite interesting when you do gather up all those funding sources. And then the last thing I see is, I call it the cost by reason, because we tend to have 2 or 3, 4 projects, and they're all tackling the same purpose, like getting more raw water, And so I think you have to somehow I'm trying to explain to the public, yeah, there's 4 projects, but they're doing this, And boy, it's tough. And I think it's up to all of us to pay a lot of attention to those public presentations we're making. And they're going to have to change over time until we get them right. But I must say, I really do appreciate the effort that staff's been putting into doing that. It's over and above what we have to do by our law, and I think that's very important. So, thank you.
Thank you, Director Hilt.
Thanks. Following up on Director Pratt's and I have been seeing the kind of language of citizens' budget, which is different than the corporate budget. So it's, and it might, I'm not sure, there's lots of variations of it, but it's more talking about kind of the wheels, I think, that turn, opposed to all the little cogs in them. And so that's one of the language pieces, or language terms I've been hearing is citizens budget. And I don't know all what it means, but it's somehow, it's the citizens need it packaged up differently than the corporation somehow. But again, that's a service level decision. Do you want to have a citizens budget to explain this stuff? So, yeah, so in some ways, that's where I go back to the financial book is kind of the citizens budget in some way. But that was just some language issues but that idea of decoupling the corporate from the citizens, I think is somehow important.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Yeah, one of the things that I've had to learn at this table is where do we get to make decisions? So transit is an easy one but it's not written down anywhere how the transit decision-making process rolls out and how and when citizens get involved in the process and so forth. So I like the idea of going by subject. Like, it's difficult to overstate how much people don't really understand what we do here. I had somebody talking to me who thought that I signed off personally on every building permit in my area. And so, you know, what decisions actually come to the board? And so if we went, even just looked at the kind of inquiries we get where people are concerned about costs, and we get a bunch around recreation, and those are like swimming pool hours or things like that. But we get other parks, you know, when is somebody going to do this or that with the park, or how do we get input into how the park is set up? And it'd be interesting to go by topic rather than the spreadsheets. There are people who love spreadsheets, and I know that Director Hiltz is one of them. But he's in the minority of the population. If I present 120 pages of spreadsheets to most people, they don't really thank me for it.
They drop like flies, right? All right. Director Kroll.
Thank you, Chair. And I think, you know, I think it's a number of people are saying the same thing in different ways, and Director Perot alluded to it, is in the municipal level, we sort of take things in blocks, like the services we have to provide, you know, water and sewage and things like that, and we deal it in sort of a step process in delivering the budget to the community. And I think if that approach could be taken a little more at the regional district level, obviously the prime thing is services provided, deal with it, get it out of the way. And the last thing we deal with is the wish list. And the wish list is sort of the thing that's easiest to, at a municipal level, I'll put that in quotation marks because I realize it's much more difficult to move money, well, you can't move money between budgets in the RD. But I think if it was sort of broken down to steps where people could, you know, a lot of people aren't, all they want is a service, regardless of what it costs. So I think having a stepped engagement would be a little more productive. And then things from various budget areas that needed to be brought in to that umbrella could be dealt with. And I think a number of people sitting at the table right now are saying the same thing in just different ways.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, there are some recommendations on page 16, and we wanted to reflect the pre-budget dates of December 5th, 6th, and 7th. So it would probably be added to the second and that. So directors. Director McMahon?
Assuming there were no further decisions we needed to make, I would be happy to move the recommendations on page 16 with the addition of those 3 December dates.
Thank you. So probably, and that the process and timelines for the 2023-2027 financial planning process be approved, reflecting pre-budget dates of December 5th, 6th, and 7th. I think that was all that we needed to reflect in the recommendations. That's seconded by Director Ties. Tina, is there anything else you needed in the recommendations? Or just that piece?
No, I think that's sufficient for the recommendation from my view, unless the corporate officer sees anything else. We've definitely made a lot of notes and have encapsulated as much as what's been outlined here, especially from the communication engagement process and policy pieces. So I think we're good.
Sorry, thank you. Seeing no further questions or comments, all those in favor? Thank you. All right, directors, we have 3 more items. I know the budget project status report may take a bit of time. Would you like to take a break now and then come back and finish up? Okay. We're at 10:42, 10:50-ish? 10:50? All right, sounds good. We'll see you back at 10:50. Welcome back. I'll just wait for all directors to turn on their video. Thank you. They're all coming back. So I welcome you back to the Corporate and Administrative Services Committee meeting of Thursday, March 24th. Before we move on to item 2, during the break, there was one other item in number 4 under the budget debrief that I think we wanted to address. Director Lee, did you want to bring that up?
Yes, thank you. It's on page 18, and it's the Area A tax summary item, because there is several tax area segments for Area A, and they're big, and it depends on the local service areas, things like North Bend or South Bend or those kind of things. And I see a lot of value in that, and I think it's a great idea to do it. I kind of envision it like the islands that are broke out. Director Ties was mentioning that to me, that's a very valuable thing. And I would think for Area A, that would be a valuable thing as well.
So Tina, do we need to put that into the recommendation?
No, because staff are going to do it anyway. It has been identified that in Area A, because there are so many variations with the local service areas, as well as there are some islands, and it's mostly to do with some of the utilities. It will be a little different than the islands because theirs are quite different, but it is a variation that we saw might be of value to those local service participants.
Thank you. All right, was there anything else that we missed that came up at the break? All right, let us move to Annex A. This is the strategic plan review timeline, and over to our CAO.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for your flexibility in moving the agenda items around a little bit. Biggest difference between this strategic plan review timeline report and the ones in previous years is we've moved this one a lot. Apologies. There, that's better. We've moved this one earlier in the year, and recognizing that this is the final year or election year, we didn't envision this year in a few discussions we've had going to a third-party consultant or anything to help us with the strategic plan review. I note I missed an opportunity under the timeline diagram to put the red line around the March 24th date to say we are here. However, we are there. Staff have updated their portions of the report card. The piece that's left is the advocacy piece, so we'll be getting some information out so you guys can have a look and provide any updates to the advocacy piece ahead of the March 31st deadline. And I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
So if we look at this, we're actually looking at scheduling a meeting then for April 22nd. Okay, so I think
That's correct.
Yeah, directors will need to look at that as well. All right, directors, questions, comments, input? Director McMahon?
Yes, I think I said this earlier, but I noted the climate change action items in our budget. And so I'm hoping that we can perhaps get a few more concrete goals onto our strategic plan there. That would be great. I don't see us doing a big upheaval at this point, but we can certainly take a good look at it. Thank you.
Anything further? All right, any issues with the timeline? So we would have a document coming out to us soon, like on the 31st?
Yeah, 31st for the updated strategic plan report card, and then there would probably need to be a bit of discussion around scoping for what that day looks like on April 22nd, but we'd get the materials to support that day out for the 15th.
Okay. All right. Seeing no further questions or comments, there is a recommendation. Director Hiltz?
Sure, I'll move the recommendations as per page 1.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Moving on to Annex D. This is our budget project status report for March 2022. And we have staff showing up. Oh, look at that. All right, so moving on to page 30. We'll go through page by page. Page 30, directors, any items on page 30? Seeing none, page 31. Page 32. If I'm going too fast and I miss something in a page, then we can always go back. Seeing nothing on 32, what about page 33? Page 34. Page 35. Director Ties.
Yeah, thank you. Item number 64, happy to see this on the list. I know it's been a while that's been underway. Just wondering if there's any update as to who's paying for what.
I'm happy to answer that question, Chair. Thank you. It's a pretty quick answer. At this point in time, there is no update. We need to get this geotechnical work and the final design done to really understand the total cost before those discussions can occur. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further on page 35? Director Pratt?
Just a comment, just looking forward, item 61 or line 61, the Cooper's Green update. I know the community is hotly anticipating an update on this as well, so looking forward to that, GM Gagnon.
Thank you. Anything further on page 35? Director Kroll.
Thank you, Chair. Just clarification on line, bear with me a second here. 67, the upgrades, the various upgrades for EV charging.
And who would like to take that one? I know it's a number of names on there.
Yeah, I certainly can give an update in respect to the areas that I'm involved in and my understanding of where things are at. And I'm just, I had a recent email from Mr. Shea. So the charging stations themselves for Field Road and Mason Road, the installation of those charging stations is expected shortly. And then what we need to do is we will be training staff, especially our fleet and our garage staff, and probably having to purchase some diagnostic tools and specialized equipment in order to help with the ongoing maintenance of our own EVs. So there's about 3 or 4 budget lines within this BPSR that are all sort of connected to the EV program. And that's sort of the update I know. In terms of phase 2, I would have to turn that over to either Manager Pro or even maybe Manager Hall can answer that, as that is really Mr. Shea's portfolio. Thank you.
Follow up, if I may. I'm just wondering if there's been consideration in applying to I guess I'm not really sure. Is this just technical work with the existing, or has there been consideration given to upgrading these stations? And would there be funding available through BC Hydro?
I can take that, Chair. So yes, there has been consideration both for phase 1 and phase 2 for receiving grants through various sources. So we continue to explore those opportunities, whether it's through EV purchases of vehicles or for the infrastructure. So yes to that one. As far as the current equipment, we have very limited EVs right now. So those are being integrated as part of the EV program, whether it's phase 1 and 2. And for phase 1, we're looking to complete that and install those like GM Gagnon mentioned. And phase 2 will expand on that based on our fleet expanding and being more and more electrified. And so there are considerable infrastructure requirements to be successful with phase 2 that are also being explored as part of grant opportunities. So for instance, we need to explore expanding our capacity for electrification here on the site for Field Road in particular. So it's a little bit more, a larger scope than phase 1 was.
Just follow up, if I may. Town of Gibsons, we applied to upgrade our EV charging stations in the community to type 3 stations, a rapid charge. And we were told by BC Hydro we don't qualify because there is a rapid charging station in Seashelt. But with the expansion of electric vehicles, it would be beneficial to everyone to have more rapid charging stations available on the coast, particularly with the long, narrow ribbon of coast that we call a highway. So just in consideration moving forward, any opportunity we get to poke BC Hydro or other funding sources for the upgrading of these stations. I believe we had a presentation at board and you're looking at like $250,000 for the rapid charging station. So anything we can do to help fund those would be great.
Thank you.
If I may, Chair, the scope of this really is just for our corporate fleet. It's not community service stations. So it's just for our internal fleet electrification.
Just for follow-up, if I may, it would be beneficial if an RD vehicle is in Gibsons and suddenly needs charging. It would be beneficial if they had a place they could go without having to sit for hours at the rec center, which is, possibly where they might be. I'll just leave it.
Thank you. Anything further on page 35? Seeing no hands up, page 36. Director McMahon.
Yes, line item 82, the waste composition study. I'm longing to know what's in our garbage, so I was wondering if there's a bit of an update there.
Thank you for the question. The contract for that is about to be awarded, so the first part of that work will be completed this May and the second part in November. And the report is scheduled to be presented in December or January for the board's consideration.
Thank you. Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Line items 77 and 79. I'm quite interested in having those completed as soon as possible. And December 22nd dates make me nervous because those usually get bumped. So I was wondering when they might start. I think that's the key here. So
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Line item number 77, they will depend on when we have a new manager for solid waste services hired. And number 79, RFP is currently being drafted, so we hope to get it out on the market shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. The question isn't about any one particular one, but it has to do with the personnel recruitment and staffing recruitment. If anything can be said about kind of the recruitment environment that the SCRD finds itself in. Lots of variation, but in that, but is there any general, like, is it going well? Is it challenging? Any general comments about recruitment? Thank you.
Mr. Parker or CAO?
Well, I can certainly start, and then perhaps CEO McKinley has additional questions or comments. I can say in general, recruitment is going very well. We have been able to fill the majority of the positions that have been posted. We have noticed a couple of challenging areas, and this is resulting in some new strategies evolving. So we're trying it again. What we have found is we've come close on a few occasions as well, where by the time we got an offer out as swiftly as possible, we're competing against many other employers. And that's I think going to continue to be one of the ongoing concerns, is that closing a deal as quickly as you possibly can, and the time to hire is something we've been improving greatly upon, and we're going to continue to do so. So in general terms, it's going well, and we hope to see that continue. Housing remains an issue. The availability, if anyone's not already living here, to find a place to live, but that's starting to improve. And we'll just keep hoping it keeps moving in the right direction. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. And CAO?
Yeah, I think Jerry summed it up really well. I would say that in addition just to the housing challenges, and those are a challenge, the cost of living, the cost of housing, especially for jobs that aren't at the upper tier of salaries. It's also, I think we are being quite successful in attracting good applicants to positions we post, but it is a challenging time, or at least it's a time where we as employers have to be very conscious of the work environment we're trying to create and the work environment we have, because I don't think there's ever been a time where people that are looking for opportunities have had as many flexible choices as they have today. So it's not just housing, it's not just the cost of living, it's also the atmosphere and the culture you have in the organization you're part of, and people are looking closely at that as they make their decisions.
Thank you. GM Gagnon?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to add that certainly, particularly in ports, we continue to struggle with recruitment, and it impacts our capacity to move some of those initiatives forward. So I just wanted to make that additional comment. Thank you.
Thank you. And how are we doing in the lifeguard world?
Lifeguard challenges continue. And that's, again, no difference across the country, but we've certainly been very appreciative of the work that our recreation and our HR crew have been able to do in trying to address some changes internally so that we can better equip our own internal staff to maybe do some new creative things that we haven't done in the past to try and, I guess, help ourselves and be less reliant on the market. So I know that sounds kind of cryptic, but we are certainly doing our best to be a bit more creative to help ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Directors, anything further on page 36? Moving on to page 37. Director Lee?
Yes, thank you. Line item 91. Quite interested in having that emergency generator before the summer. So I was just wondering, it mentioned that the procurement was to start in Q1. We're almost to the end of Q1, so I was just wondering if it actually has started.
Thank you for the question. And to be honest, I can't provide you the answer right now. If I find it in upcoming several minutes, I will let you know.
And the second part of this is line 92. That's really good news about cleaning up the water a little bit, so thank you for getting that one on the go.
Thank you. Anything further on page 37? Seeing nothing further on 37, page 38. Director Lee, did you have something on page 38? Thank you. Director Hiltz?
Yeah, I think I do. I'm just getting to page 38. It was about the Edwards siphon, and I was reading it was fused. So I guess the readiness of the Edwards, I can't find my line number now, but it was near. I think it's 38 or 39. God. Sorry about this.
That's okay. While you're looking, any other directors? Anything on page 38?
Yes, it is.
Director Lee? Sorry. Go ahead, Director Hiltz.
It's line 108. It's the Edwards siphon. So just I don't want to say, as we approach the drier season, the readiness of the siphon, is it intended to be there as one of our backups? That's still part of the plan? Thanks.
Thank you for the question. We are one of the items that's still required to be undertaken is the environmental assessment and archaeological assessment in support of the permits. There's still currently snow up there, so we have to wait for the snow to be gone before we can do the assessments, and then we'll work with the regulatory agencies to see if we can get the permits in place as soon as possible. And the fact that the pipes is fused actually means that there were smaller segments that are made into larger segments, but the larger segments still are still located at the go-to range. So they're ready to be mobilized if required. But it's not that there is an entire siphon system already completely fused over there. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Lee?
Yes, it's line 106, and it's talking about the Chapman Creek environmental flow. I was just wondering if the application, again, was intended to be done by Q1, and I was wondering if it was submitted and if it would if we're anticipating having an answer before the summer.
If we get an answer on that prior to the summer, that's our hope. If we actually get it, will depend on DFO and Flint Roars, because it will need to go to Flint Roars and DFO. And I hope to get it in place prior to the summer, because that's when it will actually be beneficial. But if we actually can make it, I'm trying to do my best to make this a priority for them to review.
To that point, we can use, like, you have a board here that you can use some advocacy. I mean, we are going to be, we're going to be going to AVICC next week. Week after that, some of us are going to LGLA. So we may be seeing some of these ministers and staff at some of these meetings. So please keep us apprised. We'll do what we can do on our side. Director Lee?
Yes, that's exactly why I was wondering if we had submitted the paperwork, because if we have, we can start leaning on them, so.
Just give us a list.
I'll keep you updated, board. Thank you for your support.
All right, page 38. Anything further on page 38? Seeing none, page 39. Director Ties, sorry, I went to.
Yeah, thank you. And mentioning advocacy, I was looking at the dam upgrades, and it looks like they're deferred till 2023. Wondering if there's any imminent safety concerns that are impacted by this delay, and also if there's some advocacy that might be needed with BC Parks. Thanks.
Thank you for your question. No, there's definitely not an imminent safety concern there. The dams have been this way for years without any concern. It would be beneficial to have them upgraded, but it's not essential. It's not critical and urgent. But it definitely, we would like to get it done as soon as possible. So on these projects, further consultation is also required with the nation, with BC Parks, with Landward. We would need to get approval from all three. And that's what we're not seeing to happen, given their staffing challenges as well prior to the summer. McNeil Lake, we're hopeful that we can get that one completed this summer.
Thank you. Anything further on page 38? Nothing further on 38. Moving to page 39.
That's what we were just at.
Sorry, we're at 39.
40 now.
Page 40, sorry. Oh, he's on page 39.
Oh.
All right, page 39, Director Hills.
Yeah, Eastbourne groundwater line 130. It's you're in the final stages of contract work, so mobilization would be kind of coming in, and that will include a drill rig, I believe. The drill rigs. I'm just wondering, are people on Eastbourne going to be surprised when they see a drill rig rolling in, or I'm just wondering the outreach to the Eastbourne people. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. The initial phase of this project is the project has kickoff meeting has occurred, and the initial phase of this project is to further explore an agreement with the private well owner, and only if that were to fail, then we will bring in a drill rig. So for now, there's no need for any of the residents to be surprised to see some big equipment on the boards to their island.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further on page 39? Seeing nothing further, page 40. Director Ties.
Yeah, thank you. I saw a couple of wastewater treatment plants, Square Bay and Roberts Creek, be delayed due to staffing shortages. I'm just wondering how the triaging of work being done is done, and who gets priority, and how that all kind of fits into a work plan when we are short on staff. Thanks.
Thank you for the question. It challenges when we have indeed vacancies in critical functions like the engineering technicians, as we currently are having, to prioritize work and to prioritize work on water, wastewater, and as well as supporting development on the coast and that require water and wastewater service connections. So these two plants are the highest priority, or definitely the highest priority on the wastewater treatment side to get them back up to where we would like them to be. So they're definitely high on the priority list for the engineering technicians too, and other staff to work on. And I had a meeting earlier this week we're really ramping up now to complete Roberts Creek in upcoming weeks.
Thank you. Is there any follow-up for that? Good. Okay. Anything further on page 40? And I'm going to look at line 158. It's nice to see the work moving forward on the potential rate structure conversation and WASAC being involved. So Good to see, good to hear. Anything further on page 40? Moving to page 41. Moving to page 42. And finally, page 43. All right, I want to say thank you to staff. I think you've noticed have been very few questions today. I think there's been a lot of effort put into updating these for this meeting, and I really like the addition of the dates, like when it was updated. I think that's been really helpful as well, because it gives us more current information. So it actually has cut down a lot, I think, a lot on the questions coming from the board. So thank you. I know it's a lot of work, but we appreciate it. All right, seeing nothing further, just checking with the board, anything we missed? Seeing none, thank you very much. We'll move on to Annex E. Annex E, and who will be presenting this? Dina, thank
I
you.
can, Chair, and then if there's any specific questions on some of the grants, some of the GMs are here to provide any background on some of those various projects. So this particular report is provided twice a year, and so the last report was presented last September. So there's various grants that are in process. There are grant opportunities that we're exploring if they align with current work plans, and there are also some grants that we haven't been successful. So this particular report provides an update on those. We continually do a scan to see if there are some grant opportunities and integrate them into our work plan. We'll take any questions if there are any.
Thank you. I'll just make a comment. I noticed the first one is the Egmont Evacuation Plan, and that was announced, and we actually looked at the list, and Seashelt and Gibson's were also successful. So we have the 25,000 for each of the plans that will be coordinated by our staff here at the Regional District. Director McMahon.
That's good news. It wouldn't be Thursday if I weren't asking about the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program grants that we applied for in 2020. Any news on those?
I believe that's the one in particular to Wood Creek.
I've got a non-update update on Wood Creek, and I'm starting to think that the funding announcements on this, when successful applicants will find out if they were indeed successful. The answer is, if you haven't heard in 5 days, just wait longer.
At the CAO Chair Forum yesterday, at the end of the day, we had Minister Cullen present, and one of his comments was they will be making announcements with these two streams within the next few days. So probably want to do it before AVICC and some of these other conferences, right, to get the information out. So we'll see. All right. Any other questions on any of these grants on here? All right, seeing none, we have no new business. We do not have an in-camera session. I'd look for a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you very much. Thank you, staff.